Welcome to Chasing Shadows. I'm Harper Lane, and today we're diving into one of America's most disturbing and enduring mysteries, the Zodiac Killer. This is part one of our deep dive, and joining me is my co-host and true crime confidant, Dylan Brooks. Dylan, are you ready to unravel the twisted threads of this notorious case?
I've been waiting for this one, Harper. The Zodiac case has so many layers. Mysterious ciphers, taunting letters, a string of chilling murders. Where do we even begin to make sense of it all?
Let's start on December 20, 1968. It's a cold, clear night near Vallejo, California. Two teenagers, David Faraday, just 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, are out on their first official date. They park on a lonely stretch of Lake Herman Road, a spot known for young couples seeking privacy. At about 11:15 p.m., someone approaches their car. No one sees the killer arrive, but within minutes, both teenagers are shot dead. David behind the ear, Betty Lou fleeing but collapsing 28 feet from the car. There's no sign of robbery or sexual assault, and police find .22 caliber shell casings scattered on the ground.
That detail always gets me. The randomness. Was there anything about David or Betty Lou that connected them to the killer? Or did investigators think it was just a crime of opportunity?
Police scoured their backgrounds and questioned dozens of classmates, teachers, and family members. Both were described as well-liked, responsible teens. No enemies, no risky behavior. Investigators found no connection to drugs, gambling, or any criminal element. There was nothing in their lives to suggest they'd be targets. The randomness and brutality disturbed detectives immediately.
So the killer left no obvious motive or clues. Did anyone see or hear anything that night? Were there any witnesses who came forward?
That's one of the most chilling aspects. Several cars passed the area that night, and one witness, Stella Medeiros, discovered the bodies just minutes after the attack. She flagged down a local resident who called police at 11:19 p.m. Another witness, William Crow, reported being followed by a strange car on Lake Herman Road earlier that evening, possibly a dry run by the killer. But no one saw the actual shooting. The lack of witnesses frustrated the investigation from the start.
With so little to go on, how did the police process the crime scene? Did they find any physical evidence? Footprints, tire tracks, anything forensic?
Officers found tire tracks left by at least two vehicles, one belonging to the victims, the other likely the killer's. They also noticed shoe prints near the passenger side door, possibly from the shooter. The .22 caliber shell casings were carefully collected and analyzed, but there were no fingerprints, no murder weapon, and no witnesses to tie a suspect to the scene. The physical evidence was frustratingly minimal for 1968 forensic standards.
I imagine the community must have been terrified. Two teenagers murdered on a quiet road. That's enough to shake any small town. How did local authorities and the public react?
The shock was immediate. Benicia and Vallejo, tight-knit communities, went into a state of collective fear. Schools held assemblies to warn students, parents imposed strict curfews, and local newspapers ran headlines like "Teenagers Slain in Lover's Lane Attack." Law enforcement set up a task force, canvassed neighborhoods, and even brought in state investigators. Yet, as weeks passed with no arrests, the case began to grow cold.
When did the Zodiac name first appear? At this point, did anyone suspect they were dealing with a serial killer? Or was it just considered an isolated, tragic event?
At first, police treated it as a standalone double homicide. But that would change 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969. That night, just after midnight, 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Michael McGow were parked in Blue Rock Springs Park, about 4 miles from the first crime scene. A car pulled in behind them, left, and returned. The driver exited, shining a bright flashlight into their car before opening fire with a 9mm handgun. Darlene was killed instantly. Michael survived, though gravely wounded.
That attack was so bold. Did Michael McGow provide any description of the killer or details about the car that could help the police?
Michael, despite his injuries, managed to give police a rough description. A heavy-set man, about 5'8" to 6'0", possibly in his late 20s or early 30s, with short, light brown curly hair. He said the assailant wore dark clothing and moved with deliberate, almost mechanical precision. Michael also recalled the car was possibly a brown or bronze Corvair, but he wasn't certain. His description would become crucial as the investigation unfolded.
And then comes the phone call, right? The killer actually called the police after this attack?
Precisely. At 12:40 a.m., just 40 minutes after the shooting, a man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone. His voice was calm, almost detached. He said, "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." Investigators traced the call to a phone booth at a gas station just blocks from the police station.
That's chilling. He's openly taunting the police. Did they find any fingerprints or evidence on the phone booth?
Officers dusted the receiver and buttons for prints and found a partial, smudged fingerprint. However, it was too incomplete for a match. The call, though, marked a turning point. This was no random killer. He was methodical, organized, and wanted the world to know about his crimes. The investigation now focused on the possibility of a serial killer at work.
When did the infamous Zodiac letters start arriving? Was it soon after the Blue Rock Springs attack?
Less than a month later, on August 1, 1969, 3 major newspapers, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner, received nearly identical letters. Each was handwritten, filled with misspellings and strange phrasings. The author claimed responsibility for both attacks and demanded the papers print his enclosed cipher, threatening to kill again if they refused. He signed off with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it.
Those ciphers are legendary. What did the first one contain? And how did law enforcement and the public respond to this puzzle?
The first cipher, later dubbed the 408 cipher, was a block of 408 characters, symbols, letters, and numbers. The author challenged readers to crack it, claiming it would reveal his identity. It was a sensation. Amateur code breakers, teachers, and even a local school teacher named Donald Hardin and his wife Betty worked for days before solving it. The message read in part, "I like killing people because it's so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all." But he gave no name, just more chilling insight into his twisted psychology.
That's so calculated. He's not just killing, he's playing a game with the entire region. Did the police believe all the letters were really from the killer, or were there doubts?
Investigators quickly determined the letters were authentic. Each contained details only the killer could know, specifics about the crime scenes, the caliber of the weapons, the positions of the victims. The Zodiac's demands, the cryptic ciphers, and the taunting tone were unlike anything police had encountered before. The media dubbed him the Zodiac after he began using the name in his letters.
That's so infamous. To control the narrative. Did law enforcement try to communicate back through the press or respond to his provocations?
The newspapers complied, printing the letters and ciphers as requested, hoping it would prevent further violence and perhaps draw him out. Police issued public statements, urging calm and discouraged vigilantism. Behind the scenes, investigators worked desperately to trace the letters, analyzing handwriting, paper, and ink, but nothing led them to a concrete suspect. The Zodiac relished the attention, escalating his taunts and threats.
When did the investigation evolve with this new public persona? Did they form a task force or bring in federal agencies?
By the end of summer 1969, local police departments, Vallejo, Benicia, Napa County, were coordinating closely. The FBI became involved, providing expertise in behavioral profiling, cryptography, and document analysis. A multi-jurisdictional task force was established, with hundreds of officers and analysts devoted to tracking every lead, reviewing known offenders, and interviewing potential witnesses. The Zodiac's ability to cross county lines complicated the investigation at every turn.
It seems like he was always just out of reach. Did any suspect stand out early on? Or was the case already shrouded in confusion and false leads?
Early on, hundreds of tips flooded in, but most proved fruitless. Several men were questioned, polygraphed, and surveilled, yet none could be conclusively linked to the crimes. The killer's seeming randomness, lack of physical evidence, and mobility frustrated investigators. Meanwhile, the Zodiac continued to write, bragging, threatening, and mocking law enforcement's inability to catch him.
The psychological aspect is fascinating. What do experts say about his mindset, based on the early letters and his behavior at the scenes?
Forensic psychologists describe the Zodiac as organized, intelligent, and narcissistic, a predator who craves power and control. His letters suggest he took pleasure in the fear he inspired. The references to collecting slaves for the afterlife and the demand for public recognition point to deep-seated delusions. Experts noted his attention to detail, planning, and ability to manipulate the media as classic traits of a psychopathic personality.
So, are there any indications from these first attacks and letters about his background or possible motivations? Anything that gave the investigators a real lead?
Police scoured their backgrounds and questioned dozens of classmates, teachers, and family members. Both were described as well-liked, responsible teens. No enemies, no risky behavior. Investigators found no connection to drugs, gambling, or any criminal element. There was nothing in their lives to suggest they'd be targets. The randomness and brutality disturbed detectives immediately.
So, the summer of 1969, people must have been terrified, especially couples. Did the Zodiac strike again before the year was out?
Yes. On September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa in Napa County, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were relaxing by the water. No fingerprints, no dropped items, not even a shoe print in the gravel. Zodiac was meticulous. The letters, however, were a different story. They were handwritten, full of spelling errors and ciphers, mailed from different cities, and signed with his infamous crosshair symbol. All were analyzed for DNA decades later, but the killer's identity remained elusive.
Were the ciphers in those first letters solved quickly, or did they add to the mystery for months or years?
The earliest cipher, known as the 408 symbol cipher, was solved within a week by Donald and Betty Hardin, two amateur codebreakers. The message was chilling. I like killing people because it is so much fun. But the Zodiac's later ciphers, like the 340, remained unsolved for decades, adding to his legend.
Did solving that first cipher help the investigation at all, or was it just another taunt from the killer?
It was mostly a psychological blow. There was no identifying information in the message. The cipher confirmed the killer's craving for attention and control. He seemed to enjoy the panic and confusion his puzzles caused, rather than fearing capture. This psychological insight shaped how investigators approached future communications.
Did police ever link the ammunition or weapon to any local gun owners? Was there any lead from gun shops or sales records?
The .22 caliber J.C. Higgins Model 80 was mass-produced and sold at Sears, making it almost impossible to trace to a single owner. Police checked local gun shops, Sears records, and even pawn shops, but nothing pointed to a suspect. The killer had chosen his tools well: common, untraceable, effective.
I can see how that would stall the investigation. Did anything suspicious happen in the area around Lake Herman Road in the days before or after the murders?
Several witnesses later reported seeing a strange man loitering near the turnout in the week before the murders. A white male, late 20s to early 30s, crew-cut hair, heavyset, but nobody got a license plate or a clear look at his face. The description was frustratingly vague, but it would reappear in later attack reports.
Were there any similarities between this first crime scene and the Zodiac's later attacks? Did investigators start to notice a pattern?
Yes, over time, a chilling pattern emerged. The Zodiac targeted young couples in secluded spots, struck quickly, and vanished. Ballistics evidence would later link the Lake Herman Road attack to later shootings, cementing the theory of a single, calculating killer stalking the region.
Did anyone come forward claiming to know the Zodiac, or were there any anonymous tips that seemed promising?
Anonymous tips poured in, over 100 in the first month alone. Some claimed to recognize the handwriting in the Zodiac's letters, while others said they'd seen a suspicious man lurking near the scene. Each lead was chased down, but none led to a credible suspect. The killer remained a shadow.
Did law enforcement coordinate across counties from the start, or did jurisdictional boundaries slow the investigation?
Early on, jurisdictional issues did slow things down. Benicia Police, Solano County Sheriff, and later Vallejo PD all investigated, but information sharing was sometimes patchy. After the Zodiac's later attacks, a multi-agency task force formed to coordinate efforts and pool resources, recognizing the scale of the threat.
Did the Zodiac ever reference the Lake Herman Road murders in any of his later letters, or did he move on to new crimes?
He referenced the Lake Herman Road killings multiple times, using them to prove his identity in letters to the press and police. He described details only the killer would know, reinforcing investigators' belief that they were dealing with a meticulous, remorseless predator who kept careful records of his crimes.
What about the local community? Did the murders change daily life, or did people try to move on?
The community was never the same. Parents imposed stricter curfews, teens avoided lovers' lanes, and gun sales spiked. Rumors of a masked killer prowling at night haunted the town. Even decades later, longtime residents remember that winter as the moment innocents died in Benicia and Vallejo.
That's so haunting. Did law enforcement bring in any outside experts or profilers after the murders, or did they rely on local investigators?
Initially, the investigation was handled locally, but as fear grew and more attacks followed, the FBI and state agencies offered support. Criminal profilers from the Behavioral Science Unit would later analyze the Zodiac's letters and crime scenes, searching for clues to his identity and mindset.
Did the Zodiac leave any calling cards or unique marks at the crime scenes, or was it just the letters that set him apart?
At the scenes, there were no physical calling cards, no symbols, no objects left behind. His signature was psychological: the taunting letters, the ciphers, and the public boasting. The crosshair symbol, which he used to sign his letters, became the Zodiac's chilling trademark.
Did the investigation ever focus on any known criminals or suspects in the area, or was the Zodiac a complete unknown?
Police ran background checks on local felons, sex offenders, and anyone with a violent history. The search included teachers, military vets, and drifters, but none matched all the evidence. The killer's carefulness and apparent normalcy kept him hidden among the community.
Were there any significant breaks or new evidence found in the weeks or months following the murders?
Despite massive canvassing and more than 2,000 interviews, no major break came. The recovered shell casings were sent to state labs, but without a suspect weapon, the ballistics evidence only confirmed the killer's method: cold, efficient, practiced.
Did the case go cold before the next Zodiac attack, or was there a constant sense of urgency in the investigation?
The case never truly went cold, but leads gradually dwindled. The sense of dread lingered, and then, just 6 months later, the Zodiac would strike again, this time in Vallejo, with another young couple in his crosshairs. The pattern was just beginning to take shape.
Did the families and community cope as time passed and there were no arrests? Did they hold vigils or memorials for the victims?
Both families held private funerals, and the community came together in support. Memorials were placed at the turnout on Lake Herman Road, flowers left by classmates and friends. As the months passed with no arrests, fear and frustration grew alongside the grief.
Did the Zodiac's first attack influence how law enforcement and the public viewed future unsolved crimes in the area?
Absolutely. The Lake Herman Road murders became the lens through which every unexplained attack was viewed. Any crime involving a firearm, a young couple, or a remote location was scrutinized for Zodiac connections. The killer's shadow loomed over every investigation.
Have any new leads or evidence come to light in recent years, thanks to advances in forensic technology?
In recent years, investigators have re-examined shell casings, clothing, and Zodiac letters for touch DNA and other modern forensic clues. While no definitive match has been found, the hope remains that one day a new technique might finally unmask the killer who haunted Benicia and Vallejo that winter night. December 20, 1968. It's cold, the air crisp, and the darkness envelops the rural stretch of Lake Herman Road just outside Vallejo, California. At 11:15 p.m., David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, are found shot dead near their parked Rambler station wagon. It's an execution-style double murder that shocks Solano County and marks the Zodiac's terrifying debut.
That's such a remote area. How did someone even discover the scene? Were there any witnesses or people nearby who heard the shots?
The discovery comes from local resident Stella Medeiros. She's driving home from Benicia to Vallejo when her headlights sweep across the Rambler. She sees the car doors ajar and Betty Lou's body sprawled on the ground. Shaken, she speeds to the Benicia Sheriff's Office, her voice trembling as she reports, "There's bodies out on Lake Herman Road." Her call launches the first response.
So what do the first responders see when they arrive? What's the condition of the scene and the victims?
Deputies William T. Warner and Daniel Pitta are first on scene. They find the Rambler parked at an angle, passenger door open. David is slumped halfway out of the driver's side, a single bullet wound behind his left ear, still faintly breathing but barely alive. Betty Lou lies 28 feet from the car, 5 gunshot wounds in her back, dead at the scene. Tire tracks, footprints, and scattered shell casings dot the frosty ground. David is rushed to the hospital but dies within the hour. The area is combed for clues.
What did investigators make of the evidence at first? Did they think it was a robbery or something more personal?
Initially, detectives consider robbery, but nothing's missing. David's class ring, wallet, and Betty Lou's purse remain. The methodical nature, the lack of theft, and the execution-style shots draw suspicion of a planned attack. Ballistics show all shots came from the same .22 caliber weapon. Investigators are struck by the killer's composure and precision.
Were there any immediate leads or suspects that night? Did anyone see a strange car or person in the area?
Several witnesses report cars parked on Lake Herman Road that night: a blue Chevy, a white Chevy Impala, and a mysterious brown Ford. Some recall a man in a parked car near the crime scene, headlights off, but nobody sees the actual shooting. The timeline is tight. The last sighting of the couple alive is 11 p.m., and Medeiros finds them at 11:15. The killer slips away unseen.
Did the police gather any physical evidence, like fingerprints, footprints, or anything else from the crime scene?
Yes, detectives collect a wealth of evidence: shell casings, tire impressions, and muddy shoe prints, size 7.5, possibly military issue. They dust the Rambler for fingerprints, but find only David's and Betty Lou's. The shell casings are meticulously mapped and photographed. Despite this, none of the prints or casings yield a match at the time.
Did the crime scene suggest anything about the killer's psychological profile? Was there anything unusual about the way the murder was carried out?
The killer shows chilling control. No signs of haste, no close-range struggle, just cold efficiency. The separation of the victims, David shot first, Betty Lou chased and gunned down as she fled, suggests a power dynamic, a desire to dominate. Criminal psychologists later note the detachment and the lack of personal connection, classic hallmarks of— Yes, even in 1969, law enforcement consults early criminal profilers. Dr. John Douglas, later famous for the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, is among those who theorize about the Zodiac psychology, suggesting he's white, male, 25-40, intelligent, methodical, and driven by a need for control and recognition. The killer's letters become as much a focus as the physical evidence.
How did the investigation into the Zodiac ciphers progress? Did anyone manage to solve them quickly?
Astonishingly, the 408 symbol cipher is cracked within a week by Donald and Betty Hardin, a schoolteacher couple from Salinas. They spot patterns and common phrases, revealing the Zodiac's chilling confession, but no identity. The remaining ciphers prove far tougher, and 2 are still unsolved decades later. The ciphers become a symbol of the case's elusiveness.
Did the Zodiac communicate with police or media again after these first letters? How frequent were his contacts?
He maintains a steady barrage: letters, postcards, phone calls. He sends additional ciphers, references unsolved crimes, and mocks police failures. The media becomes both his stage and battleground, with every new communique sparking panic and fascination in equal measure. Investigators realize they're dealing with a killer who thrives on spectacle and notoriety.
Did the police ever get close to apprehending a suspect in these early months? Or was the killer always one step ahead?
The Zodiac is always just out of reach. Every promising lead fizzles. Alibis check out, suspects are cleared, tips lead nowhere. The killer's careful planning, lack of direct witnesses, and use of gloves and generic weapons keep him one step ahead. The frustration among detectives is palpable, and the public's fear deepens as the Zodiac's legend grows.
The Zodiac case is a forensic labyrinth. Investigators began collecting evidence as early as July 4, 1969, after the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Shell casings from a Luger semi-automatic 9mm were retrieved. Vallejo PD logged these meticulously, hoping for ballistic matches. But the Zodiac's real signature, his taunting letters, would become the forensic focus, especially for DNA and fingerprint analysis.
Can you walk me through how the police handled evidence from those first crime scenes, especially in terms of preserving fingerprints or DNA back in 1969? What were the procedures like?
At Lake Herman Road, officers found bullet casings and tire tracks, but forensic preservation was limited by the era's technology. Fingerprints were dusted on surfaces, car doors, windows, even the victim's belongings, but only partial, often smudged prints were found. DNA wasn't yet a tool, so every latent print was precious. Officers wore gloves, but some evidence still risked contamination due to urgency and limited protocols.
Did any of those early fingerprints lead to suspects or provide a breakthrough, or were they all too partial to be of use? Were any prints actually matched to individuals?
Most prints from the early scenes were partial and didn't yield immediate matches. For example, at the Blue Rock Springs attack, prints lifted from the car and door handles didn't match any known offenders. Vallejo PD sent these to the FBI's latent fingerprint section, but the prints were too fragmentary for definitive ID. Investigators hoped for a future match if they caught the right suspect.
What about the Zodiac's letters? Were those a better source of fingerprints or forensic evidence than the crime scenes themselves?
The Zodiac's letters became prime forensic evidence. In July and August 1969, the FBI lifted 2 fingerprints of value from the second and third pages of the August letter to the San Francisco Examiner. These were stored under latent case A1042. Additional prints were found on the Vallejo Times-Herald letter and the cipher block sent to the Examiner. However, none of these led to a match, and the Zodiac's habit of licking envelopes offered hope for future DNA analysis.
Did the Zodiac ever mention trying to avoid leaving fingerprints? Was he actually careful, or did investigators find evidence he was sloppy at times?
Interestingly, in November 1969, Zodiac claimed he wore transparent fingertip guards made from airplane cement to avoid leaving prints. Yet, SFPD and FBI files reveal he was often careless. At Paul Stein's murder scene in October 1969, witnesses saw him wipe down parts of the cab, but technicians still found dozens of latent prints, some with traces of blood. These included prints on the post between the front and rear doors and on the right front door handle.
Were any of those bloody prints from the Stein cab identified as definitely belonging to the Zodiac, or could they have been from someone else?
The SFPD crime lab determined that several of the prints, especially those showing traces of blood, were likely from the suspect, since they were in places only the killer could have touched after the shooting. However, none matched any suspects at the time. Despite their value, the prints were incomplete. The infamous bloody print was lifted with powder, but the department never confirmed if it was made in blood or by Zodiac himself.
Did the police ever get close to apprehending a suspect in these early months, or was the killer always one step ahead?
The Zodiac is always just out of reach. Every promising lead fizzles. Alibis check out, suspects are cleared, tips lead nowhere. The killer's careful planning, lack of direct witnesses, and use of gloves and generic weapons keep him one step ahead. The frustration among detectives is palpable, and the public's fear deepens as the Zodiac's legend grows.
The Zodiac case is a forensic labyrinth. Investigators began collecting evidence as early as July 4, 1969, after the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Shell casings from a Luger semi-automatic 9mm were retrieved. Vallejo PD logged these meticulously, hoping for ballistic matches. But the Zodiac's real signature, his taunting letters, would become the forensic focus, especially for DNA and fingerprint analysis.
Can you walk me through how the police handled evidence from those first crime scenes, especially in terms of preserving fingerprints or DNA back in 1969? What were the procedures like?
At Lake Herman Road, officers found bullet casings and tire tracks, but forensic preservation was limited by the era's technology. Fingerprints were dusted on surfaces, car doors, windows, even the victim's belongings, but only partial, often smudged prints were found. DNA wasn't yet a tool, so every latent print was precious. Officers wore gloves, but some evidence still risked contamination due to urgency and limited protocols. Did any of those early fingerprints lead to suspects or provide a breakthrough, or were they all too partial to be of use? Were any prints actually matched to individuals?
Most prints from the early scenes were partial and didn't yield immediate matches. For example, at the Blue Rock Springs attack, prints lifted from the car and door handles didn't match any known offenders. Vallejo PB sent these to the FBI's latent fingerprint section, but the prints were too fragmentary for definitive ID. Investigators hoped for a future match if they caught the right suspect.
What about the Zodiac's letters? Were those a better source of fingerprints or forensic evidence than the crime scenes themselves?
The Zodiac's letters became prime forensic evidence. In July and August 1969, the FBI lifted 2 fingerprints of value from the second and third pages of the August letter to the San Francisco Examiner. These were stored under latent case A1042. Additional prints were found on the Vallejo Times-Herald letter and the cipher block sent to the Examiner. However, none of these led to a match, and the Zodiac's habit of licking envelopes offered hope for future DNA analysis.
Did the Zodiac ever mention trying to avoid leaving fingerprints? Was he actually careful, or did investigators find evidence he was sloppy at times?
Interestingly, in November 1969, Zodiac claimed he wore transparent fingertip guards made from airplane cement to avoid leaving prints. Yet, SFPD and FBI files reveal he was often careless. At Paul Stein's murder scene in October 1969, witnesses saw him wipe down parts of the cab, but technicians still found dozens of latent prints, some with traces of blood. These included prints on the post between the front and rear doors, and on the right front door handle.
Did the police ever get close to apprehending a suspect in these early months, or was the killer always one step ahead?
The Zodiac is always just out of reach. Every promising lead fizzles. Alibis check out, suspects are cleared, tips lead nowhere. The killer's careful planning, lack of direct witnesses, and use of gloves and generic weapons keep him one step ahead. The frustration among detectives is palpable, and the public's fear deepens as the Zodiac's legend grows.
The Zodiac case is a forensic labyrinth. Investigators began collecting evidence as early as July 4, 1969, after the Blue Rock Springs shooting. Shell casings from a Luger semi-automatic 9mm were retrieved. Vallejo PD logged these meticulously, hoping for ballistic matches. But the Zodiac's real signature, his taunting letters, would become the forensic focus, especially for DNA and fingerprint analysis.
Can you walk me through how the police handled evidence from those first crime scenes, especially in terms of preserving fingerprints or DNA back in 1969? What were the procedures like?
At Lake Herman Road, officers found bullet casings and tire tracks, but forensic preservation was limited by the era's technology. Fingerprints were dusted on surfaces, car doors, windows, even the victim's belongings, but only partial, often smudged prints were found. DNA wasn't yet a tool, so every latent print was precious. Officers wore gloves, but some evidence still risked contamination due to urgency and limited protocols.
Did any of those early fingerprints lead to suspects or provide a breakthrough, or were they all too partial to be of use? Were any prints actually matched to individuals?
Most prints from the early scenes were partial and didn't yield immediate matches. For example, at the Blue Rock Springs attack, prints lifted from the car and door handles didn't match any known offenders. Vallejo PD sent these to the FBI's latent fingerprint section, but the prints were too fragmentary for definitive ID. Investigators hoped for a future match if they caught the right suspect.
What about the Zodiac's letters? Were those a better source of fingerprints or forensic evidence than the crime?
That must have been terrifying for the victims' families. Did any of them ever talk about how the case shaped their lives in the years after?
Absolutely. The trauma lingered for decades. Darlene Farron's sister, for example, described becoming reclusive, changing her phone number, and shielding her child from the media. She recalled Darlene as a vibrant, loving person and said the family's grief was compounded by constant public scrutiny and a lack of closure.
Did any neighbors or local residents report suspicious behavior in the days before the attacks? Were there any patterns that investigators noticed?
Some neighbors near Blue Rock Springs reported seeing an unfamiliar car cruising the area days before the shooting. A few noted a man sitting alone in parked vehicles, sometimes late at night, but descriptions varied. Some said he was in his 20s, others swore he looked older. These inconsistencies plagued the investigation and made it challenging to establish a pattern or profile.
What about the infamous Zodiac letters? Did law enforcement or experts ever analyze the writing style for clues about his background or psychological state?
Yes, handwriting experts and linguists dissected every letter. They noted the killer's educated vocabulary, unique phrasing, and deliberate misspellings. Some forensic psychologists suggested the Zodiac was highly intelligent, possibly with a background in cryptography or law enforcement. Others saw signs of narcissism and a need for attention, the way he taunted police and the media, always staying one step ahead.
Did any experts or family members come forward with their own theories about who the Zodiac really was?
Many did. Tom Voigt, a leading Zodiac researcher, documented hundreds of tips and suspects. Some victims' relatives became amateur sleuths, pursuing their own theories for years. The case attracted retired detectives, forensic linguists, and even crypto-analysts from the NSA, each offering new perspectives but no definitive answers.
It's amazing how many people got involved over the years. Did law enforcement ever publicly name a prime suspect based on witness or expert input?
Several names surfaced. Arthur Lee Allen was the most notorious, largely due to circumstantial evidence and Mageo's partial identification. Larry Kane was also named, especially after Kathleen Johns' account. However, conflicting witness statements, lack of physical evidence, and inconsistent timelines always undermined these theories. Police never made an arrest.
Were there any moments during the investigation when it felt like they were on the verge of catching the Zodiac, only to have the case slip away?
Multiple times. After the Stein murder, police flooded the area and canvassed for witnesses. When Officer Folk realized he might have passed the killer, the sense of a missed opportunity haunted the SFPD for years. Each promising lead, whether a tip from a family member or a new eyewitness, ultimately dissolved into uncertainty, leaving the case as open and enigmatic as ever.
Do any of the surviving witnesses or victims still talk about their experiences today? Have their stories changed over time?
Some, like Michael Mageo, have given occasional interviews, but time and trauma have blurred details. Family members of victims, such as Darlene Farron's sister, have spoken publicly about the enduring pain and frustration. Their testimonies remain heartfelt but often reflect the deep scars left by years of mystery and unresolved grief.
It's hard to imagine living with that kind of uncertainty for decades. Did any witnesses ever receive threats or feel like they were being watched after the attacks?
Yes, especially those connected to the Farron and Stein cases. Some reported anonymous calls, shadowy figures outside their homes, and even strange letters. Whether these were from the Zodiac or cruel hoaxers remains uncertain, but the fear was very real. The psychological toll was immense. Many changed their routines, moved away, or sought therapy.
Were there any significant breakthroughs in the case in recent years, maybe through new witness testimonies or forensic technology?
In recent years, advances in DNA analysis have offered a glimmer of hope, but degraded evidence has limited results. Some new witness testimonies have surfaced in documentaries, but most are re-examinations of old stories rather than game-changing revelations. Still, each new voice adds a layer to the Zodiac's shadowy legacy.
With so many conflicting statements and shifting memories, do investigators believe that the true identity of the Zodiac will ever be uncovered?
Many remain hopeful, especially with ongoing forensic advancements and renewed public interest. However, the passage of time, lost evidence, and unreliable memories cast doubt. The Zodiac's greatest weapon may have been his ability to sow confusion, manipulate witnesses, and vanish into the fog of collective uncertainty. Let's dive into one of the most debated chapters of the Zodiac case, the development of suspects and the tangled web of theories that have ensnared investigators for decades. After the confirmed Zodiac attacks between December 1968 and October 1969, the San Francisco Police Department compiled a staggering list of over 2,500 potential suspects, yet no one has ever been officially charged. Detective Dave Toshi, who led the investigation for years, filled 8 filing cabinets with files on men whose names surfaced due to tips, cryptic letters, or mere coincidence.
That's incredible! 8 cabinets just for suspects? With so many leads, how did investigators even start narrowing down who was worth a closer look? What kind of details put someone on their radar?
Investigators zeroed in on suspects using several criteria: proximity to the crime scenes, access to firearms, handwriting comparisons, and any links to the victims or the Zodiac's cryptic letters. For instance, Arthur Lee Allen became one of the most scrutinized suspects following a tip from a friend who claimed Allen had talked about killing people and using the name Zodiac. Police also weighed factors like alibis, criminal histories, and even medical records. Allen, for example, had a watch with the Zodiac symbol.
Allen's name comes up so often. What were the specific details connecting him to the crimes? Did he have any personal connection to the victims or crime scenes?
Allen's ties were circumstantial yet chilling. He lived in Vallejo near several attack sites and was fired from a school in 1968 for alleged misconduct, just before the Zodiac killings began. His friend, Don Cheney, told police that Allen had fantasized about hunting humans and called himself Zodiac. Yet Allen's fingerprints and handwriting didn't match Zodiac's, and DNA testing decades later didn't link him to the letters. Still, he owned a Zodiac brand watch and was known for cryptic conversations.
That's fascinating, but also frustrating. So many coincidences, but nothing conclusive.
What about Alan's alibi? Was he ever able to account for his whereabouts during the attacks?
Allen gave various alibis. For the Lake Berryessa attack on September 27, 1969, he claimed to be scuba diving at Salt Point State Park with friends. However, no one could confirm seeing him there that day. For the Paul Stein murder in San Francisco, Allen told investigators he was at home watching TV, but his family's statements were vague and inconsistent. Police searched Allen's trailer and seized typewriters, knives, and guns, but none could be definitively tied to the Zodiac.
Did any witnesses ever identify Alan in police lineups or sketches? Were there any descriptions that matched him closely?
Witnesses offered composite sketches after the Paul Stein murder, describing a stocky, middle-aged white man with glasses. Allen somewhat resembled the sketch, but not perfectly. When shown to surviving victim Michael Maggio, Allen was said to look similar, but Maggio wasn't certain. None of the surviving witnesses could definitively identify Allen as the Zodiac in lineups. Still, the resemblance in the sketches kept him in the public eye.
Let's talk about other suspects for a moment. I've heard names like Richard Marshall, Gareth Penn, and Larry Kane. What were the main theories and evidence surrounding them?
Richard Marshall drew suspicion due to his reclusive nature and eccentric habits. He was obsessed with silent films and lived near the crimes. He reportedly made cryptic comments about murder and was seen at events where Zodiac letters were mailed. However, handwriting and forensic evidence did not connect him directly to the case. Gareth Penn, a Harvard-educated mathematician, became a suspect because of his obsession with the Zodiac ciphers. He published theories suggesting he could decipher hidden confessions in the letters, but there was no physical evidence linking him to the murders. Larry Kane was suspected after being identified by a surviving victim, Kathleen Johns, who claimed Kane had abducted her. Yet his alibis and physical evidence didn't match up.
That sounds like each suspect had peculiarities, but nothing that truly stuck. Were any of these suspects ever publicly cleared? Did law enforcement ever officially rule anyone out?
Yes, several suspects were publicly cleared over the years. Allen was the most notable. After his death in 1992, DNA from Zodiac's letters was compared to his, and there was no match. Handwriting experts also failed to link him. Marshall was cleared after handwriting analysis and a lack of physical evidence. Gareth Penn was never officially named as a suspect by police, and Larry Kane's prints didn't match those found at the crime scenes. Police remained cautious, often saying they could not rule out suspects entirely, but no one was ever charged.
Did any forensic evidence from the crime scenes, like fibers, hair, or other physical evidence, help eliminate or implicate suspects?
Forensic options were limited, but police collected bullets, shell casings, and tire tracks from the scenes. Paul Stein's shirt fragment, sent by Zodiac, provided a rare physical link. Partial fingerprints were found in Stein's cab and on some letters, but they were incomplete. No unique fibers or hairs were identified that matched any suspect. The lack of definitive forensic evidence remains a major obstacle in the case.
What about forensic evidence? Did investigators recover any DNA, fingerprints, or other physical traces from the Zodiac's letters or crime scenes that helped with suspect elimination?
Forensics were limited by 1960s technology, but several key items were preserved. The Zodiac's letters sometimes bore saliva on stamps and envelope flaps, and partial fingerprints were lifted from Stein's cab and the letters. In recent years, authorities attempted to extract DNA from these sources, hoping genetic genealogy might yield a match. As of June 2025, no definitive match has been reported, but advances in DNA technology keep hope alive that a break could still come. The breakthrough reignited public and investigative interest, sparking renewed scrutiny of the Zodiac's letters and possible links to other unsolved crimes. Authorities revisited old evidence with new forensic methods. Most notably, they began a re-examination of stamps and envelope seals, hoping to recover DNA snippets that earlier technology missed.
Was there any success with DNA evidence from those old stamps or envelopes? Did it bring investigators closer to unmasking the Zodiac?
That's one of the most suspenseful twists. Early DNA analysis from the 2000s had been inconclusive, mostly due to contamination and degraded samples. But in the early 2020s, new efforts using advanced mitochondrial DNA sequencing yielded partial genetic profiles from some Zodiac letters. This allowed investigators to definitively rule out several suspects, but the samples weren't complete enough for a positive ID.
Which suspects were ruled out by these DNA tests? Were any of the long-standing suspects finally cleared?
Among the most notable was Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect for decades. Despite circumstantial evidence, like his proximity to the crime scenes, disturbing behavior, and possession of Zodiac-like watches, DNA from a 2002 test of a Zodiac envelope did not match Allen. This result devastated some investigators who had spent years pursuing him.
That must have been a huge disappointment for the police. Did the DNA evidence implicate anyone else, or did it just narrow the field?
It primarily narrowed the field. Investigators shifted focus to genetic genealogy, similar to techniques that cracked the Golden State Killer case. By 2022, they were working with genealogists to build familial trees from the partial DNA profiles, hoping to identify relatives of the Zodiac through public databases. This process is painstakingly slow and sensitive due to privacy concerns.
Were there any new suspects that emerged from this genealogical approach? Or was the Zodiac's identity still elusive?
No definitive suspect emerged, but the approach generated leads. Investigators identified several families with members who fit the Zodiac's age and geographic profile: white males born between 1925 and 1945 with ties to the Bay Area. Still, none matched all the behavioral, forensic, and circumstantial evidence, so the Zodiac's identity remained officially unknown.
What about the other ciphers? Were there any breakthroughs with those, similar to the Z340?
Two ciphers remain unsolved, the Z13 and Z32, sent in 1970. The Z13, in particular, was believed to contain the killer's name. "My name is," followed by 13 characters. Despite extensive cryptanalysis, no one has confidently cracked it. The Z32, a 32-character cipher, was sent with a map and implied a planned bombing. These unsolved ciphers still haunt cryptologists.
That's fascinating. Were there any major twists in the investigation after the Z340 was solved? Like new evidence or witness testimonies that shifted the narrative?
Absolutely. In 2021, a retired detective, Tom Voigt, uncovered a trove of previously overlooked police files. They included a 1971 report about a man seen at Lake Berryessa, where Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were attacked, who matched the composite sketch but was never properly investigated. Witnesses described his nervous demeanor and a car matching the description of the Zodiac's possible vehicle.
Did this new witness account point to someone specific, or was it another frustrating dead end?
The lead was tantalizing, but ultimately inconclusive. The man, a local transient named Richard Gaikowski, had a history of mental illness and was later considered a fringe suspect. Handwriting analysis of his known letters didn't match the Zodiac's. Still, the report raised questions about investigative oversights and the number of viable suspects overlooked in the early 1970s.
With all these new developments, did law enforcement agencies work together? Or was there still a lot of jurisdictional tension like in the early days?
Interagency collaboration improved markedly post-2000. The FBI, California DOJ, and local agencies shared case files, forensic results, and suspect lists. The formation of multi-jurisdictional task forces led to more cohesive efforts, though the enormous backlog of evidence and bureaucratic red tape still hampered progress.
Were there any psychological breakthroughs or new criminal profiles developed using modern techniques?
Yes, forensic psychologists in the 2010s used behavioral analysis to refine the Zodiac's profile. They concluded he likely had above-average intelligence, possibly with narcissistic and antisocial traits. His obsession with ciphers suggested a technical or academic background. Notably, the taunting nature of his letters pointed to deep-seated insecurity and an intense desire for control.
Did these psychological insights help narrow down the suspect pool? Or did they mostly reinforce what was already suspected about the Zodiac?
The insights reinforced existing theories, but also highlighted new avenues. For example, profiles suggested the Zodiac may have worked in a field requiring secrecy or technical expertise, such as military, communications, or academia. Investigators cross-reference these fields with census and employment records from the late 1960s and early 1970s to identify new persons of interest.
Was there any physical evidence, like fingerprints or ballistics, that tied the Zodiac definitively to any of the crime scenes?
Partial fingerprints were recovered from several Zodiac letters and crime scenes, especially from the cab of victim Paul Stein in San Francisco. Ballistics linked bullets from the Benicia and Vallejo murders, confirming the same weapon, a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. However, none of the fingerprints or ballistics were unique enough to identify a single individual.
That must have made it nearly impossible to definitively link a suspect. Did police ever release composite sketches or other identifying features to the public that generated credible leads?
Yes, after the Stein murder, witnesses described the suspect as a white male, 35 to 45 years old, stocky build, with glasses and a crew cut. The composite sketch became iconic, plastered across the Bay Area. Thousands of tips poured in, but none led to an arrest. Over time, the sketch was revised as new witnesses came forward, but the core description remained consistent.
Did any witnesses ever come face to face with the Zodiac and survive? What did they remember most vividly?
Two survivors stand out, Michael Maggio and Brian Hartnell. Maggio, shot at Blue Rock Springs in July 1969, described the Zodiac as a heavyset man, 5'8" to 5'10", with a round face. Hartnell, stabbed at Lake Berryessa in September 1969, recalled the killer's distinctive black executioner's hood with a crosshair symbol on the chest. Both survivors described an eerie calmness in the attacker's voice and movements.
That's chilling. Did their testimony help create psychological profiles or influence the investigation's direction?
Their testimony deeply influenced both the psychological profile and the composite sketch. Investigators noted the Zodiac's methodical, ritualistic behavior, especially at Lake Berryessa, where he spoke calmly to his victims, tied them up, and used a knife instead of a gun, suggesting a desire for control and a flair for theatrics.
Were there any major twists in the Zodiac letters themselves, aside from the ciphers?
The letters were meticulously crafted, often featuring deliberate misspellings and cryptic references. In one, he claimed to have attached a flashlight to his gun for aiming in the dark, a detail only the killer could know. However, he never revealed verifiable personal information. Some letters included taunts about police incompetence, and in 1974, he claimed responsibility for 37 victims, a number never confirmed.
Did investigators ever find evidence that the Zodiac was connected to other unsolved crimes or murders outside the Bay Area?
Investigators explored links to dozens of unsolved cases, including the 1966 murder of Cherry Joe Bates in Riverside. In 1970, the Zodiac implied involvement in a letter, but forensic evidence never established a direct connection. The scope of his possible crimes remains one of the case's enduring mysteries.
Were there any surprising suspects or theories that emerged in the 21st century, especially after the DNA and cipher breakthroughs?
Yes, several amateur sleuths and online communities proposed new suspects, including Gary Francis Post, a deceased Air Force veteran whose alleged resemblance to the composite sketch and ties to the Bay Area attracted attention. However, law enforcement stressed that no DNA matched Post, and evidence remained circumstantial.
The controversy has fueled heated debates in online communities and among experts.
What about Arthur Lee Allen? He's always been a central figure in the case. Has anything new emerged about him? Arthur Lee Allen, a convicted sex offender and former elementary school teacher, died in 1992. He was never formally linked to the Zodiac murders, though circumstantial evidence, like his proximity to the crime scenes, possession of Zodiac-like items, and witness reports, keep him a fixture in discussions. Recent forensic reviews haven't produced any DNA or fingerprint matches to Allen, leaving his status as suspect unresolved. The ambiguity of his involvement continues to puzzle investigators.
Are there any specific witness accounts or expert opinions that have been revisited in light of new technology or theories?
Yes, several. For example, Michael Maggio, who survived the 1969 attack that killed Darlene Ferrin, described the shooter as a heavyset man, around 5'8", with light brown hair. This description has been reanalyzed with modern facial recognition software and compared to both Allen and Post. Additionally, expert profilers have revisited the Zodiac's written communications using linguistic analysis software to search for hidden patterns or signatures that might point to a specific suspect.
That's fascinating. Have modern documentaries or media projects contributed any useful information or new leads?
Definitely. The 2025 SXW Zodiac Killer Project documentary series premiered this year, featuring interviews with surviving investigators, amateur sleuths, and the victims' families. The series has led to a surge in public interest, resulting in new tips submitted to law enforcement. Some tips reference overlooked details in old police files, while others suggest possible new suspects based on reinterpreted evidence. Law enforcement has not detailed these tips publicly, but investigative efforts have intensified as a result.
With all those renewed efforts, are there any specific unresolved questions that investigators or experts are particularly focused on now?
Several critical questions remain at the forefront. First, the identity of the Zodiac